All right, I think everybody's back. Hope you had, I'm sorry it wasn't more time to catch up, but I hope everybody at least got to say hello. So before we announce this morning's speaker, just wanted to really quickly, I've put a little link here in the chat, and it's for Donna. And look, 2020 has not been an easy year for a lot of folks. A lot of people have been isolated due to COVID. The national political dialogue has not been cordial, to say the least. And a lot of folks have lost their jobs. There's a lot of stress, and people are looking for clarity. And we really need your help to reach them this year. We're celebrating 10 years of supporting people to live a Zen-inspired life. And we're calling it 10 years of gratitude. And we're so appreciative for everything that you've done as a Sangha to help make that vision possible. Roshi and Sensei have done groundbreaking work at making the Dharma available to a modern secular audience. And we give a lot of thanks, but the work has just begun. So this year we have a lot in store to try to reach folks. We have 25% more Foundations of Mindfulness classes on offering, Zen Life series, classes on mindful parenting, Zen history, grace workshops, forgiveness workshops. We're going to do 4 retreats. So there's a lot going on, but we really need your help to make it possible. So we're hoping, while it's on top of your mind and while you're thinking about it, if you just wouldn't consider a donation to help us for this year. I thank all of you who responded to the letter graciously and made donations already, but we'd appreciate it. For the rest of you, if you would just take a moment to reflect on what ZLMC means to you and what it could mean for others, if you could give us a chance to do so. Your generosity will go a long way to helping people find the wisdom and courage they need to kind of put their lives back together. And that way we can all heal together. So I thank you in advance for your generosity. This morning, we have Roshi Robert Althouse speaking with us. It's really nice to have guest speakers. We've had quite a few of them lately, but sometimes it's even better to hear from our very own abbot and co-founder of the center. And he's going to speak this morning about Mu and activating absence. So I'll give you Roshi Robert Althouse. You're muted, Roshi.
Thank you, Shikan, and good morning, everyone. We're just coming off of a winter retreat, which was wonderful. We have many ways of practicing here at our Zen Center. We've worked very hard to make our practice open and inclusive and teach mindfulness in a way that makes our spiritual path very accessible to everyone. But also it may not be so apparent that we also do Zen training here, and it's not for everyone, but for those who want to do a deeper dive, you can study with a mentor, so to speak. You can study with myself or Sensei, and that is part of our Zen tradition. It's a mentoring tradition of studying face-to-face. And one of the things you take up here, if you do that kind of study, might be koans. And I hardly ever speak about koans, but I thought I would talk about one of the koans that you would, that's quite famous. It's known as Mu, and I'd like to speak about it this morning. So one of the seminal spiritual texts in our Chan or Zen tradition is known as the Mumon Kan, or the Gateless Gate, or the No Gate Gateway. And the first koan that appears in this text is popularly known as Mu. So I'd like to start by this morning by reading the Wumon's prologue or introduction to the koan, and then a couple of the gathas that he's attached to this koan in the Gateless Gate text. Buddhism calls mind its ancestral nature, its household, and no gate, its dharma gate. If it's an absent gate, no gate at all, how could anyone pass through it? We've all heard that whatever enters through a courtyard gate can't be the household treasure, and whatever arises from the origin tissue must be limited to beginning and end, fruition and ruin. But that kind of talk, it's like waves churned up without any wind, like wounds cut deep into healthy flesh. In the search for understanding, what's worse than using a tangle of words? You're just swinging a stick as if you could hit the moon. Scratching a boot as if you could itch your foot. How could that ever work? In the bestowal accord reign Wu, year of the rat, I, Prajna Clear, led the Sangha at Dragon Soar Monastery in East Revard. It was the summer session, and monks were hungry for insight. So I taught in accord with whatever moment the loom of origins unfurled, using Sangha cases from ancient masters like clubs to batter down that gate and scatter the roof tiles. I copied them down without a goal. I just started not thinking about the structure, the befores and afters, a finished book. Now there are 48, and together I call them the No Gate Gateway. If you're like the long edge of the Star River, wielding your lone blade fearlessly, no care for danger and death, you'll enter through the gate with a single slash. Not even the 8-armed demon king could stop you. Heaven's 28 Indian patriarchs and Earth's 6 Chinese patriarchs, you'll leave them all gazing at wind and begging for their lives. But if you hesitate, it's like looking through a window across the room and glimpsing a horse gallop past outside, scarcely seen and already gone, vanishing away. And the Gatha? The Great Way is a single absence gate. Here on 1,000 roads of presence. Once through this gateway, you wander all heaven and earth in a single stride. And the koan, as it's usually translated, is a monk asked Master Joshu, does a dog have Buddha nature? And Joshu replied, moo. And here's another, I think, a little bit more interesting translation. A monk asked Master Joshu, or Visitation Land, a dog too has Buddha nature, no? And Visitation Land, absence, Joshu replied. And then Wumon or Prajna Clear writes a further commentary on the koan, which is too long to say here this morning because we'll run out of time. And then he finishes this koan with a final gatha, which reads as follows. A dog, Buddha nature, the whole kit and caboodle revealed in a flash. Think about presence and absence, and you're long lost without a clue. So this is the koan, and if you take up koan study here, fairly early on, you're going to be working on this koan. We call it the gateless gate koan, the entry to our spiritual tradition. And this koan, like others, is alive for us today, or can be, as it was 1,000 years ago for monks in China. Nevertheless, I do think that some context would help us appreciate the depth of what we're speaking about here. And as I've been saying for some time now, I think the transmission of Chan to the West has involved a narrative that is really a stunning project of cultural appropriation, in which Chan is presented as if it were Japanese and it were primarily Buddhist. There's nothing the matter with this. We have received this tradition directly from some amazing Japanese Buddhist teachers. My root teacher was Taizan Maizumi Roshi, was Japanese. But in the process, we have missed a lot of the cultural richness that comes from the Chinese and Taoist tradition. So a more accurate narrative might say that when Buddhism arrived in China during the 1st century of our current era, it was reinterpreted and formed by Taoist thought. And its more abstract metaphysical sensibility became grounded in an earthly empirical vision of the cosmos and the world. And the result of this is the Chan that later developed in the 3rd and 5th centuries. And in the process, Buddhism is so transformed by Taoism that it's scarcely recognizable as Buddhism at all. So, I think one of the contexts that would be very useful for us in appreciating the richness of this spiritual tradition would be to retrieve the Taoist roots that so inform the development of Chan in China, and provide much of the richness and depth in this spiritual tradition. Chinese culture is very different from our own, especially early Chinese culture. And we're talking about philosophical Taoism here, not the later Taoism that developed that was a kind of folk religion. And so it's challenging to try to put ourselves in the mindset of early Chinese philosophical intellectuals and Chan practitioners, because we're likely to bring our own cultural and intellectual assumptions along with us. Chan monasteries often function like inns where traveling artists and poets and intellectuals stayed, and they saw Chan not as a religion, but as a philosophical practice in line with their indigenous heritage of Taoism that cultivated a deep and profound insight into the empirical nature of consciousness in the cosmos. And their creative works were deeply influenced by Chan and Taoism. So, and many of the Chan monks were artists themselves. So we have these koans in our tradition that developed in China. And many of them are records between an interaction between a student and a teacher. And they consist of poetic passages and strange expressions and wild behavior intended to upend reason and encourage the mind to move past its limitations of logical thought. As such, they come forth often with poetic wildness and an urgent immediacy instead of the usual explanations or utilitarian ways by which language is often used. These encounters and stories are known in China as Kunan, now widely known by us as koans, which is the Japanese term for that word. And Kunan means a court case. It literally means public case. So these were originally conducted not in private, as we do them today, but very much out in the open, in public, where the entire monastery would gather to hear them and talk about them. And the Kunan was considered to be a factual situation that needed to be understood accurately, just as we in our culture might treat a legal case in a court today. One thing I don't think we really appreciate about the Chinese is how social and relational they were. In many ways, we have privatized Zen practice according to our own cultural proclivities, and because we have a very individual orientation. So koans are considered to be something that's done very much in the private with the teacher, between the teacher and the student. But in China, it was not like that. It was certainly that took place as well. But I just want you to get the picture that these koans, these kunans were spoken freely, publicly in the monasteries. Now, the difference between a kunan and a legal case in our culture is that the kunan requires a response from within the enigma or the paradox of at a level that preceded thought or analysis. And since the Kunan represented a kind of precedent for the whole community, we could loosely translate Kunan as a Sangha case, a community case. It is a distinctive literary form designated to complicate, to deepen disorientation, and to deconstruct thought and explanation. Many of these kunans were collected in the Sung Dynasty, which was one of the golden ages of great culture and art in China, in which poetry, calligraphy, and Chinese landscape painting excelled. And the person who collected this particular collection of kunans, called the No Gate Gateway, was Wumon Huikai, or No Gate Prajna Clear. He lived from 1183 to 1260 and was in the Linshi tradition, which is better known to us as the Rinzai school of Zen or Chan. So to approach a koan like this is to really hit a brick wall. There's nowhere you can go with it. Your conceptual mind cannot grasp it. And part of the design of these kunans is to wear you down so you just get tired of trying to explain it rationally until you have to make some kind of leap of letting go. We say there's three qualities really required to do this kind of study: great determination, great faith, and great doubt. And we say the greater your doubt, the greater your faith. It's a little odd because we usually think of faith as certainty in something, but here in our tradition, we develop faith through questioning and being willing to put everything up for grabs. That takes some courage. We're pretty attached to our particular way of seeing the world. And in many ways, it's small. And in many ways, it's contrived. So now if we were to address the relationship of Taoism to Chan, which I find really interesting, and I've been looking at this for the past year, we might say that Chan formalized a philosophical practice that cultivates a spiritual ecology that is an extension of Taoism. Chan originated in about the 4th century in China, and it was really an amalgamation of both the tradition, the indigenous practices in China of Taoism, which was very old, and Mahayana Buddhism. And almost all aspects of Chan conceptual framework are anticipated in Taoism's seminal texts such as the Tao Te Ching, the I Ching, and the Chuang Tzu. Tao originally meant way, as in pathway or roadway, but Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu redefined it as a generative cosmological process, an ontological pathway by which things come into existence, evolve, and then leave, only to be transformed and to reemerge again. I've been talking about this in our retreat because what is so amazing about Taoism, it's such a big picture of the cosmos and our place in it, that we are all part of one tissue in a sacred cosmos, no matter what scale you're speaking of, whether you're speaking of stars and planets or you're speaking of the biosphere. It's the same patterns from the view of Taoism. We are all a piece of one cloth. There is no ontological separation here between me and the world, subject and object. So the character for Mu, or that's the Chinese term for Wu, in Chinese means not. And it's used a lot in Taoism, as we'll see in a moment. But it also has another meaning that enriches and deepens this Kunan. It also means absence. So we're being invited when we work on a koan like this to approach this from a deep ontological level, where the distinction between absence and presence arises. You see, part of the problem is that we're just seduced and attracted by things. And the Chinese didn't see things. They didn't see things, they saw patterns. They saw wholeness. Presence is simply the empirical universe, which the Chinese call the 10,000 things. That's in constant change and transformation. Absence is the generative void from which this ever-changing realm of diversity and beauty of presence emerges. Absence is more foundational of the two principles, and its nature is reflected etymologically as a pictograph of a woman dancing and in a swirling movement enhanced by foxtails streaming down from her hands. This is a very, very old Chinese character from which the character Mu or Wu was derived. Another term for this cosmological generative process is Zhuzhan, which literally means self ablaze. From this comes self-so, or the of itself. But best translated, we might say this means occurrence appearing of itself. So it's apparent from this that Taoism has had a deep and lasting impact on Chan, and that it has a very large cosmological view of the world in which absence and presence run throughout and are totally thread all the way through many of the koans that we appreciate now here in our tradition. One of the central teachings of Taoism was Wu Wei. And this Wu is the same character that we're talking about here for Mu, not or absence. And that term, Wu Wei, is often translated as non-action. But literally, it means not acting or absence acting. So we could say that it means acting without self-identity. And this selfless action relates to this notion of Suzhan, of the Tao emerging as the 10,000 things. So Wu Wei means to act as an integral part of Suzhan, a spontaneous process of absence coming forth into presence and presence returning back into absence. So the practice of Wu Wei is to move in a kind of wild energy with the Tao, with the cosmos itself, to be in accord with that. And another term for related to Wu Wei, using the same character Wu, is Wu Shen, which means absence alive. So it means living without this self-identity, and so we could say selfless living. And we sometimes speak of this as the unborn, living without self-identity. So this particular Kunan is a gateway, a kind of checkpoint that a Zen student must pass through in order to clarify the great matter of life and death. That's what we're concerned about here, is to really look deeply and clearly at what is our life and what is our world and what is this? So it's a kind of checkpoint where you're asked to pass from the kind of conditioning of our culture, whatever culture we're in, into a kind of wild and foreign territory. And this and other koans are meant to help us resolve the sort of fundamental spiritual questions. So how to seemingly pass through this closed gateway between ourselves and non-verbal depths, the gateway between thought and silence, subject and object, self and the universe. Now, Chan leads to an initial discovery through the practice of meditation that we are not our thoughts or even our memories. We are not the center of identity that we assume ourselves to be. And this leads to a kind of further realization that the cosmology of absence and presence defines consciousness itself. Thoughts are presence vanishing back into absence. So consciousness, my consciousness, your consciousness, is part of the same cloth and fabric of the cosmos itself. In fact, we might say that the cosmos created our amazing, beautiful planet and all the creatures on it so it could see itself. So we're here just to be able to allow the cosmos to be aware of itself. Now, isn't that a big story? Isn't that a better story? So Chan speaks of Wu, or empty mind, or the tranquil mirror, all mystery and shadow, and then instructs us that one must become absence and mirror the whole. And this is reminiscent of many of the Tao Te Ching teachings about dark wisdom that I spoke about earlier in the retreat. And it reminds us of the dark side of the mirror that Ehe Dogen spoke about in the Genjo Koan, when he said, though one may deeply understand the forms of body and mind, though one may deeply understand what body and mind are saying, still this is not like the moon and water, which is only realized on one side when the other side is dark. The functioning of the mirror depends on the relationship of yin and yang, between absence and presence. And when one side is dark, the reflection takes place. No amount of human effort or contrivance can produce that effect, which occurs effortlessly. Our efforts seem to get in the way. So it's a bit of a conundrum. How do we approach these kunans, these koans? We have to surrender on some level. We have to let go, get out of the way. There's really nothing hindering us from seeing the point, from seeing our lives as complete and whole and sacred. And there's nothing preventing us from passing through this gateless gate. Listen again to what Prajnagate says in this Gatha at the end of this Sangha case. The great way is a single absence gate, here on 1,000 roads of presence. Once through this gateway, you wander all heaven and earth in a single stride. No hesitation. So I think without the Taoist context, we are very likely to overlay our cultural assumptions onto this Chan tradition. So a teaching such as emptiness, which is often misunderstood, is assumed to be a kind of non-material metaphysical realm, in contrast to a material realm or presence. So we interpret absence and presence as a dualistic pair, in which presence is the material world and absence is the metaphysical womb from which the material realm emerges. But Wu Men, No Gate, and the Taoists would not have recognized any metaphysical dimension in this dualistic thinking, because they were like other artists and Chan practitioners and Taoists in China. They were thoroughgoing empiricists. And in the empirical model of the cosmos, there is no metaphysical womb. There is no separation. Absence and presence are part of the same cloth. the same generative cloth. There is no creation story here. There is no beginning and there is no end. So it is unborn. We are unborn. You are unborn. So I'll finish with this, the beginning text from the Tao Te Ching, and then we could have some time for discussion. A way called way isn't the perennial way. A name that names isn't the perennial name. The named is mother to the 10,000 things, but the unnamed is origin to all heaven and earth. In perennial absence, you see mystery. And in perennial presence, you see appearance. Though the two are one and the same, once they arise, they differ in name. One and the same, they're called dark enigma. Dark enigma, deep within, dark enigma, gateway of all mystery. So maybe we could have a little discussion. Any questions or comments about that? Yeah, Shishin, Mark?
Thank you, Roshi. I certainly began to wonder about, you talked about Mountains and Rivers Sutra the other day, and I certainly began to wonder about the beginningless eon, and the relationship what Dogen wrote about to all of this. And I realized, I mean, we said this the other day, that Tao is throughout Dogen, and I think you've given me a lot of understanding about what Tao is, just even more this morning. I really have a greater sense of what Dogen was meaning, because Dogen also writes in Uji that time is that or nothing. And I think that when I now think about absence, as you described it, that's a wonderful new way of appreciating nothing.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I think absence really enriches the whole koan here and gives it a whole nother dimension. Yeah. You know, part of how I've gotten to this is I've been studying Chinese medicine. I'm not going to be a Chinese medical practitioner, but I've been studying with a bunch of doctors online a very, very old text called the Neijing. And often it's this kind of Chinese medicine is poo-pooed as kind of pseudoscience. But what I have discovered in studying with these people, that this very old sacred text, the Neijing, is really profound. And it's a profound empirical natural science. The Chinese were really observant about the natural world, and all the symbols and characters in this Neijing text are all about nature, and they're all about growth or plants or and everything on, no matter what scale you're looking at, whether you're looking at the cosmos or the biosphere, they saw the same patterns throughout. And they viewed the cosmos as resonant, as actually the constellations resonating down, and not not directly influencing the earth, but orchestrating movements of patterns and seasons. And I just am kind of blown away with how rich this very old Chinese text is, and how they were practicing serious medicine. So they had to be rigorous, because the consequences of being sloppy were serious. And the people that are really deeply coming from this Chinese medical tradition, they use acupuncture to treat. They call it acupuncture surgery. They use it to treat cancer and all kinds of serious diseases. They don't consider it an adjunct of Western medicine. And so I'm just, I mean, I love Western medicine. I'll go to Western doctors when I need them, but I find this is the Chinese view of the world to be so different from the one that I'm in, that I'm just curious about it. And I find that they see the world not with no separation. There's not this, when you look at the Chinese landscape paintings, the mountain is there. It's you. There's immediacy in that image. They're not looking out at a mountain. And I just find especially the early philosophical, we really have to make a distinction between philosophical Taoism and religious Taoism that developed later, which is kind of corny in a lot of ways. It's a kind of folk religion, and they start using magic and get into all kinds of kind of silly things. But the early philosophical Taoism is very, very old, and it's feminine. The whole energy, there's so much honoring of the feminine in the Taoist teachings. It's quite amazing to me. And so what I started to realize as I started studying Taoism, I start seeing all these things that come up in our koan study resonating from the Taoist tradition. And that just is quite interesting to me. But then I'm deeply involved in koans and my tradition. So I think the influence of Taoism on Chan was considerable. Yeah, Robert?
I feel like I've spent a lot of my practice trying to grasp what emptiness is, because it's not a really good translation in English. And I thought I'd heard every metaphor or synonym for it, but I never heard absence.
For what?
For emptiness.
Uh-huh.
I never heard absence as a metaphor for it or as a synonym for it. And I feel like all the English synonyms we have for it, it's sort of, if you put them all together, you start to get a feeling for what emptiness is. And that might be another one to add to the arsenal. But I'm curious, I've never studied Taoism either. I've read Stephen Mitchell's translation of the Tao Te Ching, but I've really never studied Taoism. Is Tao sort of a synonym for the absolute? Would that be accurate or no?
No. First of all, I don't, who was that you read?
Stephen Mitchell,
there's a lot of, first of all, there's a lot of translations of the Tao Te Ching. I've read his translation and don't particularly care for it. We use the terms absolute and relative, and I'm kind of tired of those terms. I've used them all my life, and we just need to look at things freshly and bring another perspective to it. Again, I think we slip into a kind of certain assumptions about absolute and relative as being these kind of metaphysical notions. And I just think that's completely missing in Taoism, because the sense is it's a generative cloth, of a whole cloth. So you can't have the presence without the absence. They are completely interwoven, and they arise out of a place that's unnameable, that's beyond space and time, that is identified particularly in the Neijing. And so absence and presence are even limiting in some ways. They wouldn't necessarily use those terms in the Neijing. What they would say is that there is something in our universe that is beyond space and time. And then some movement comes out of that, which is identified as yang. There's a movement away from the source. We have to talk about it, so I have to name it. And then that movement away from the source, there's a returning movement, which is the yin. And that is basically the movement of our world and the whole cosmos. And in other words, if we were to say what it is, it's breath. The world is breathing, the cosmos is breathing, and that breath movement creates the fabric of the universe, which is called qi. And the qi is mostly intangible. In other words, we don't see it. The qi that we see, the material forms that we see, is about, the tangible qi is like 4 or 5% of it. So they speak of this this movement of the return and the swinging of yin and yang, and they see it in the cosmos as circles and spirals. But when they get down to the biosphere, they're seeing it as axial and radial patterns in plants, and then they see those axial and radial patterns in the body. I'm getting somewhat off track from your original question, Robert, but it's a little overwhelming, actually, all this stuff. It's hard to integrate, but I think absence brings, I wouldn't say the Tao, it's really hard to pin down what the Tao is any more than is what emptiness is, but the Tao, they don't really have a clear distinction in Chinese language between nouns and verbs. So when you say Tao or absolute, it sounds like something. But the truth about the absolute is that it doesn't exist. That's why it's the absolute. And now how are we going to talk about that without immediately slipping into some kind of dualistic thinking that then is not really what it is? Yeah.
Yeah, I think but the West, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes here. Hi, like the West had, like when the first European, travelers went to Asia, they didn't even know what Buddhism was. They had to like apply all their terminology to what Buddha Dharma is.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to like use a bunch of loaner words basically. Like enlightenment is a Western European word that they kind of applied to the state of enlightenment. So, and they're still happening now. I think things are still getting sort of lost in translation.
Well, there's always challenges in translating one tradition from another, and so we're still pretty young as a religious tradition in the West, if we're speaking about Buddhism or Zen. We're just babies. Ruth?
So is there a way that what you talked about, which was rather esoteric for me, would be practiced in my daily life?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think it's important to bring everything down to earth. So that I'm sure that sounded very esoteric. The basic practice is meditation. You're sitting and being with your experience, and you're really watching the content of your consciousness, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories. And you're just noticing that those thoughts that you thought that seem so solid aren't as solid as they actually are. And I think that's the basic practice of meditation that we're all doing. And we have different ways of talking about how to work with the breath or whatever. But you're basically, the notion of mindfulness is that you're stepping back. There's some kind of space between your experience of your thought, and there's you begin to be able to watch it. There's some sense of the watcher, and that allows you to begin to deconstruct the self itself. The self also is made solid by our thoughts. So I think the meditation practice leads to a deeper inquiry about the nature of who we are. But it's very down to earth. It doesn't require, koans aren't for everyone. They're just one skillful means in our tradition among many others. But I think the basic practice always comes back to meditation, and it's important to keep it simple, you know.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah. Hard to be simple. I'll tell you a story. When we first moved to Hawaii, June and me had gone to a beach, and I was just in heaven. I was in this beautiful paradise. My gosh. And we went to a beach, and we were playing, and we were going to build a sandcastle or something. And so we were collecting rocks and things, and I went about building a castle. You know, I got rocks and build them all up, and then I looked over to see what June had done. She'd take like 3 rocks and just put them on top of each other. It was so elegant and simple. Yeah, that's the way to do it. That's simple, but I had to build a whole, you know, thing. So it's hard to be simple. And I think our practice brings us back to the simple things in life that are enduring and important. And we often just get distracted from that quality of awareness and attention, which is always firsthand and direct and embodied. And we get thrown around, and we get busy, and then we lose track of who we are.
I've got to say, though, that sandcastle was quite amazing.
I guess it's all in the eye of the beholder.
In Zihuatanejo, they have sometimes these sand sculpture events. It's not a contest, but they're events.
Yeah.
And people create these incredible sand sculptures, female bodies, castles. Think of it, it's there. And the next morning they're gone.
Yeah.
There and not there.
Yeah.
It was the first time I saw it, I was sad. And then it was before I was practicing Zen, long before. And then
So I want to leave you with one last thought, because I've been talking about something that seems very esoteric and absent, you know, absence and emptiness or whatever. The planet we live on, this planet is extraordinary, and the biodiversity is complex and just the richest, most precious thing we have. And the idea that we would go to heaven and go somewhere else is just absurd to me. Heaven is this planet. You want to go be reborn as a rock on the moon or Mars? Go ahead. But my gosh, look at what look at our planet, and then look what we're doing to it. It's a big problem. And it's a spiritual problem. We'll use technology to help, but if we saw the world, if we saw our planet as the sacred planet that it is, we would not put plastic in the oceans. We would not let corals die, and we would not let the salmon disappear in the rivers. We just wouldn't do it. And so it's a spiritual problem. We need a spiritual ecology, and we need not just our individual, we need a collective awakening. I mean, we need to wake up collective. We can't, no one can do this on an individual basis. So there's, you know, there's environmental movements now. What's the name of the one out of England, the big one? Anybody?
Greenpeace?
No, I can't think of their name right now. Anybody know?
Extinction Rebellion?
Yeah, Extinction Rebellion. They're a movement, and they're global now. We need to pay attention. This is not. This is serious, and we live in. We're in heaven right now. Heaven's not somewhere else. This planet is just amazing, and to be. Go watch Attenborough's documentary. Attenborough is this wonderful, amazing teacher that, you know, did all these, explored wildlife his whole life, and he's in his 80s, and he made this documentary. I think it's on Netflix or Amazon. It's kind of his witness, and he's talking about the loss that he has seen in his lifetime of the biodiversity on the planet. And he ends by making some very specific and concrete suggestions of things we could be doing. And I think we need to pay attention to this. I think I'll leave you with that. And this has been a tough year. Winter's likely to be tough too. And I think we should also be remembering our healthcare providers and the people that harvest the food in the fields, the immigrants, and how much suffering and disruption is taking place right now. And do all we can to support each other and to be aware of that there's a lot of disruption, loss of jobs, people being evicted from their apartments, and we just need to come together and not demonize people that disagree with us. We need to find ways to connect and remember again what it means to be an American. If you happen to be in America, we're a country of immigrants. So I think I'll leave you that. We're moving into winter, so please rest, take good care of yourselves, exercise. Please practice social distancing and wear masks. It's not a political issue, it's a health issue. And it's a matter of being respectful to each other and to all those nurses and doctors that are traumatized and working overtime because of the insensitivity of many in our country that are not paying attention. Science is a good thing. Okay, I think we'll leave it with that. And so June and I are we were going to go to Mexico, but we're not going because it feels unsafe to travel. So we're going to have a what do you call that? A stay vacation?
Staycation.
So you may not see us around for the rest of the month very much. Or you might. We don't know. Blessings to all of you, your families, your extended families, your communities, your churches, your congregations, all of that. Blessings to all of you.
Bon voyage.
And to you both.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Roshi.